Florida. A land of sun, sand, and secrets. A place where the law is supposed to stand as firm as the palm trees bending in the wind, unshakable, unwavering. Here, a sheriff's badge isn't just a piece of metal. It's a symbol of authority, a shield of protection, a promise to serve. But what happens when that promise is broken, not by a stranger, not by some faceless criminal, but by the very man sworn to uphold it? Before we unravel the chilling story behind one of the most gruesome family massacres in Florida's history, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss the true crime stories that expose the dark side of power, greed, and betrayal. Sheriff Daniel Ruiz was a man of the law. Respected. Feared. Trusted. For 18 years, he patrolled the streets of a quiet Florida town, keeping order where crime always threatened to spill over. He knew every back road, every powerful businessman, every desperate soul looking for an easy way out. But most importantly, he knew the rules of survival: never owe a favor to the wrong people. And yet, he did. It started as a whisper, a quiet offer in the back room of a bar, a favor for a friend, a deal too small to matter. A shipment that wasn't checked too carefully, a call that was never made, a file that disappeared overnight. Ruiz told himself he was still in control. That he was the one calling the shots. But the cartel doesn't operate on trust. They don't ask, they take. And once they own you, you never walk away. At first, it seemed manageable. The money was good. The risks were small. But power is a slippery thing. You don't realize you've lost it until the ground beneath you collapses. Ruiz thought he could keep his hands clean, that he could play both sides. But the cartel never forgets. And when a sheriff with too many secrets starts feeling guilty, starts looking for a way out, there's only one way it ends. With blood. The summer of 2019 was supposed to be just another season in the small town. Tourists came and went. Locals went about their business. The sheriff's family, his wife, his 2 teenage sons, and his 10-year-old daughter, believed they were safe in their home. After all, Daniel Ruiz was a man who had always protected them. But the cartel doesn't just punish. They make examples. It started with a phone call, one Ruiz had been dreading for months. A demand. A final warning. But this time, it wasn't just about him. It was about them. When the sheriff hesitated, when he failed to deliver what they wanted, the cartel sent a message. And that message came at night, silent as the Florida heat, brutal as the tide that never stops rising. The Ruiz family never stood a chance. What happened inside that house was something out of a nightmare. No mercy. No survivors. The scene the next morning was so horrific that even seasoned law enforcement officers were shaken. It wasn't just about murder, it was about control, about power, about a warning written in blood. And the sheriff? His fate was even worse. By the time the authorities caught wind of the massacre, the cartel had already vanished into the shadows, leaving only destruction behind. The sheriff's name, once a symbol of law and order, was now tied to something far darker. The investigation uncovered the truth, about the deals, the secrets, the lies. About how a man sworn to uphold justice became a pawn in a game he couldn't win. But the real question is, did he ever have a choice? This isn't just a story of corruption. It's a story about what happens when the wrong people get too much power. When the line between right and wrong fades into nothing. When a single decision can bring down everything, your career, your reputation, your family. Sheriff Daniel Ruiz thought he could outrun his past. But in the world of cartels, there's only one way out. And it's never clean. This is a story of retribution. And in the world of the cartel, retribution is never swift. It is never clean. It is never merciful. Sheriff Daniel Ruiz thought he had it all under control. A badge on his chest, a gun on his hip, and the respect of an entire town. He wasn't just a lawman, he was their protector, their neighbor, their friend. The people of his quiet Florida town trusted him with their lives. He walked into every room with the quiet confidence of a man who made people feel safe. They called him a hero. A leader. A man of conviction. For years, Ruiz upheld the law with an iron grip, taking a hard stance against crime, leading drug busts that made headlines, cracking down on cartel shipments before they ever reached the streets. His deputies posed for photos beside bricks of seized cocaine, duffel bags overflowing with cash, and the smuggled weapons they pried out of the hands of criminals. The newspaper articles called him the last line of defense against the cartel's poison. His community believed in him. And Ruiz? He smiled, shook hands, attended every town hall, every fundraiser, every charity event, always reassuring his people that as long as he was sheriff, their families had nothing to fear. But behind the polished badge, the flashing lights, and the headlines, something else was lurking. Something no one saw. A shadow growing beneath the surface. At first, it was just whispers. Stories that didn't quite add up. A shipment seized, yet somehow, weeks later, the same product was circulating back into the streets. Arrests made, but certain names mysteriously absent from the reports. And then there were the deals. The ones that never made the papers. Ruiz had a way of handling problems before they became problems. A quiet conversation. A favor exchanged. A case dismissed for lack of evidence. And if anyone got too curious, they were gently, but firmly, reminded that some questions didn't need answers. So people stopped asking. Until the day someone did. The tip came in without warning. A single unmarked envelope slipped under the door of the local DEA field office. Inside, just one sheet of paper, typed, anonymous, just a few lines of text, "Your sheriff isn't who he says he is." At first, it seemed like nothing. A disgruntled ex-con. A rival trying to stir the pot. Baseless accusations. But then, the second half of the message, "Look at the last raid. The numbers don't match." And just like that, the first crack appeared in the perfect facade of Sheriff Daniel Ruiz. Because when the DEA pulled up the records, they noticed something strange. The official reports claimed that $1.8 million in cash was seized during a cartel bust. But the ledger, recorded by one of Ruiz's own deputies, showed $3.2 million. A difference of $1.4 million, gone. Vanished. Ruiz had been skimming cartel money right off the top. And the DEA wasn't the only one watching. The cartel has one rule: loyalty above everything. They don't forgive. They don't forget. When they invest in a man, when they buy his silence, his protection, his obedience, they expect that investment to pay off. So when they realized Ruiz had been playing both sides, taking their money while keeping up his crusade against them, they knew there was only one way this would end. But the cartel doesn't just kill people. They send messages. Ruiz didn't know it yet, but his entire world had already been marked for destruction. It happened fast. Too fast. One moment, Ruiz was in his squad car, leaving a late-night meeting at the station. The next, his radio crackled, a panicked voice calling in a home invasion at his address. His home. His family. He floored the gas pedal, sirens wailing, his mind racing. His wife. His kids. He had 3 minutes to reach them. And when he did, the street was quiet. Too quiet. His front door was open, not kicked in, not forced, just open. And inside, there was no sound. No screams. No struggle. Just silence. The kind of silence that hits you in the gut, tells you before you even step inside that it's already over. And it was. No survivors. His wife, his 2 sons, his 10-year-old daughter, gone. Not just murdered, but erased, their bodies left in a scene so grotesque that even hardened homicide detectives would later say it was one of the most brutal cartel executions in Florida history. And Ruiz? They saved him for last. They let him live, long enough to see what they had done. Long enough to know exactly why. They had taken everything from him, his family, his career, his reputation, all because he made a mistake. Because he forgot who really had the power. Because he thought he was in control. But the cartel had been in control from the start. And when a lawman forgets that, they remind him, in the bloodiest way possible. The news exploded. A sheriff's entire family slaughtered in what officials called a targeted execution. The press rushed in, reporters speculating, the community in shock. How could this happen? Who would do such a thing? It didn't take long for the truth to surface. The DEA went public. The secret dealings. The stolen cartel money. The whispers that had been ignored for too long. And just like that, the legend of Sheriff Daniel Ruiz collapsed. No more handshakes. No more town hall meetings. No more smiling photos in the newspaper. Just a man in disgrace, left with nothing but the cold, brutal truth: the cartel doesn't tolerate betrayal. And when they take revenge, they take everything. Sheriff Daniel Ruiz isn't just a name anymore. He's a cautionary tale. A reminder that in the world of the cartel, power is an illusion. That even the strongest badge is worthless when the real monsters come knocking. And when they do, they don't leave witnesses. If you want more true crime stories that uncover the dark secrets lurking behind badges, deals, and betrayal, subscribe now and turn on notifications. Because in this world, the truth is always more terrifying than fiction. It was a small detail, a footnote in an otherwise flawless record, the kind of thing that only someone on the inside would know. 2 months prior, Sheriff Daniel Ruiz's department had conducted one of its biggest drug busts yet. 50 kilos of cocaine seized in a raid on a known cartel hideout. It was all over the news. Another victory against the criminal underworld. Another trophy for the sheriff's office. But the anonymous tip said otherwise. The real haul had been 70 kilos. 20 were missing. There was no record of them. No mention in any report. No evidence they had ever existed. The DEA ran the numbers. Checked the logs. Cross-referenced witness statements. It wasn't just a rumor. It was the truth. And once a crack forms in a foundation, it doesn't stop, it spreads. Florida has always been a battleground. Not the kind with flags and soldiers. Not the kind written about in history books. But the kind fought in the shadows. Where the weapons weren't just guns, but fear, silence, and control. Where the cartel wasn't just an outside force, it was woven into the very fabric of the town. Moving through it like an invisible hand, pulling strings where the law didn't reach. For years, Sheriff Daniel Ruiz had stood against it. In his early days, as a young deputy, he made a name for himself by taking down street-level dealers, cutting off supply lines, putting away smugglers. He had been ruthless. Determined. He thought he could win. He thought that if he just arrested enough of them, if he just pushed hard enough, he could stop it from taking root in his town. But he didn't understand what he was really up against. The cartel wasn't some small-time gang. It wasn't just a few criminals operating out of a rundown house. It was an empire. And it had been here long before he ever put on a badge. Then the debts came. A house. A wife. 2 kids. A sheriff's salary that barely covered the cost of living. Ruiz wasn't a greedy man. He wasn't looking to get rich. But he was tired. Tired of watching bills pile up. Tired of telling his wife that they'd have to put off fixing the roof leak again. Tired of pretending things were fine when they weren't. And that's when the first favor came. It was nothing. Just a name on a list. A minor dealer, caught up in a drug sweep, someone from out of town. Someone who didn't matter. A lawyer showed up at the station with an envelope. $10,000 in cash. Unmarked. No threats. No demands. Just a request, make the charges disappear. Ruiz didn't take it. Not at first. But the lawyer wasn't just a lawyer. He was a messenger. And the people he worked for didn't hear no. So the paperwork went missing. The case fell apart. The dealer walked free. And that was that. One favor turned into two. Two turned into 10. Before long, Ruiz wasn't just looking the other way, he was an asset. A name the cartel could trust. A man inside the system. A sheriff who controlled what the public saw. He decided which cases moved forward, and which ones died before they ever started. He made sure the right shipments got through. He warned them when the DEA was close. He buried evidence, stalled investigations, fed them just enough information to keep himself useful. And the money? It kept coming. At first, it was small stacks. Enough to cover the debts. Enough to keep his family comfortable. Then it was more. Enough for a bigger house. Enough for vacations. Enough to pretend that he was still in control. But power is a dangerous illusion. And Ruiz had forgotten one thing. The cartel doesn't give. It owns. And once you belong to them, there's only one way out. Ruiz thought he could manage it. Thought he could play both sides. But when the cartel realized he was skimming from their shipments, they knew he had forgotten his place. And the cartel doesn't warn twice. They erase. Not just you. Everything you love. The night they came, Ruiz was nowhere near his home. But his family was. His wife. His sons. His 10-year-old daughter. They never saw it coming. The cartel didn't just punish him. They made a statement. A brutal, merciless, unforgettable statement. When Ruiz finally arrived at the blood-soaked scene, he knew, this wasn't just a murder. It was an execution. A message. A message that he had never been in control. That he had never been powerful. That the cartel had been pulling his strings from the beginning. And now, they had cut those strings, for good. By morning, the truth was out. The DEA exposed the secret deals. The missing drugs. The stolen money. And the name of Sheriff Daniel Ruiz, once respected, once trusted, was now a mark of disgrace. No more praise. No more handshakes. Just a man with nothing left, except the cold reality that when you betray the cartel, there is no redemption. Only retribution. And in the world of the cartel, retribution is never quick. It is never clean. And it is never merciful. This isn't just a story. It's a lesson. A reminder that when the wrong people hold the power, when greed and fear collide, there is only one outcome. And when the cartel decides to end you, they don't just take your life. They take everything. And they make sure you live long enough to feel it. Had more to offer than dusty streets and sleepy afternoons. But lately, even she had begun to notice the strange shift in her father. The phone calls, the urgent whispers, the way he'd lock himself in his office for hours, the tension in his movements. Sarah had always suspected something was off, but it wasn't until she stumbled across her father's secret that the truth slammed her like a runaway freight train. Rodriguez stood in the doorway, eyes wide with panic as he saw the box on the kitchen table. The weight of everything he'd done, every lie, every compromise, hit him like a ton of bricks. But what terrified him wasn't the money, or even his wife's knowing stare. It was the look in his daughter's eyes, a mixture of disappointment and fear. "What's going on, Dad?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Why are you keeping all this from us?" He didn't know how to answer. There was no way to explain it, no way to make her understand why he'd chosen this path. It wasn't about greed, or power, or the lifestyle he could have only dreamed of. It was about survival. About the mounting pressure, the promises made, and the sacrifices that came with the badge. "I didn't want you to know," he said finally, his voice breaking. "I didn't want any of this to touch you. But it was too late for that." His actions, his choices, had already entangled them in a web too thick to escape. Sarah's tears came in waves, anger mingled with hurt, but it was Sarah who spoke the words that made Rodriguez's heart sink further. "We're not safe, are we?" He couldn't lie to her. The danger was real, and it wasn't just a shadow hanging over him anymore. The rival cartel, Los Reyes del Sur, had already made their presence felt. And now they were closing in, not just on him, but on his entire family. He could feel the ground shifting beneath him. The life he had built, the control he had so carefully nurtured, was crumbling. Every compromise had led to this moment, a breaking point where there was no turning back. "I'm doing everything I can to fix this," he told her, his voice strained. "I'm going to make it right." But his words felt hollow. In the back of his mind, he knew that the road ahead wasn't one he could navigate alone anymore. The cartel wasn't just watching him, they were watching his family, his every move, waiting for him to slip. And slipping he was. As the days passed, things began to unravel faster than he could control. Rodriguez wasn't just running out of options, he was running out of time. His final meeting with El Zuro confirmed his deepest fears. The rival cartel wasn't interested in negotiating, they had come to take control, to erase Rodriguez and all the ties he had with Los Pitos. The quiet precision of Los Pitos was about to be shattered, and with it, the fragile balance of power in Rio Verde. Rodriguez had learned too late that once you crossed the line, there was no going back. The cartel didn't forgive, and they didn't forget. As El Zuro had so chillingly put it, "You're already dead, Sheriff, you just don't know it yet." Now, Rodriguez was a man on borrowed time. He had no choice but to make a decision, protect his family and disappear, or fight until his last breath. But he wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. The betrayal he had once chosen had now come full circle. And the very system he'd sworn to protect had turned against him, forcing him into a corner with no escape. With each passing hour, the weight of his decisions felt heavier. He could hear the whispers of his past choices, echoing in his ears, each one a reminder of the price he'd paid. And as he glanced over at his family, the faces he loved, he knew that this war wasn't just about him anymore. It was about them. And there was no turning back. Rodriguez picked up his phone. The time for playing by the rules had ended. He had one last call to make. If he couldn't win this battle, he'd make sure that his family did. His fingers hovered over the contact list, but before he could hit dial, a knock on the door froze him in his tracks. His heart skipped a beat. That it wasn't the knock of someone he knew. It wasn't the knock of someone who was here to talk. It was the knock of someone who had come to settle a debt. Rodriguez grabbed his gun, the weight of it now more familiar than the badge he wore. He was no longer Sheriff Michael Rodriguez of Rio Verde. He was a man in hiding, a man who had made his bed, and now had to lie in it. And as the knock came again, louder this time, he knew the cartel's final decision had been made. There would be no more favors, no more running. The time for pretending had passed. Now, there was only the cold, hard truth of the choices he'd made, and the inevitable consequences that followed. With a deep breath, he opened the door. And everything changed. Sheriff Daniel Ruiz had spent years believing he could outmaneuver the inevitable, that he could keep his badge and his deals, his respect and his corruption, his lawman's honor and his cartel connections. But corruption doesn't grant immunity. It only delays the reckoning. And the reckoning had begun. It started with a single mistake. His daughter, Anna, was just a teenager, restless in her small Florida town, always looking for a way to make life seem bigger than it was. Social media was her escape, a way to show the world that her town wasn't just a forgotten speck on the map. One night, she posted a picture. Nothing special. Just a shot of the family truck, parked outside an old warehouse on the outskirts of town. A place her father had explicitly warned her to stay away from. She didn't know what was inside. She didn't know that it was where her father had arranged for a shipment to move through unnoticed. But someone else did. The picture spread fast. A cartel scout saw it. Recognized the location. Recognized the truck. And just like that, a routine operation became a disaster. Ruiz spent the entire next day trying to fix it, calling in favors, reassuring his cartel contacts that it was just a mistake, that it was nothing. But the damage was already done. That night, he kissed his wife on the forehead, told his kids goodnight, and tried to convince himself that he had everything under control. But deep down, he knew the truth. He had lost control a long time ago. The next morning, as Ruiz stepped out of his truck in the sheriff's office parking lot, something caught his eye. A white envelope, carefully placed under his windshield wiper. His pulse quickened as he reached for it. Inside, a single sheet of paper. 7 words. You can't serve 2 masters. No signature. No instructions. Just those words. Ruiz glanced around. The lot was nearly empty. A few deputies lingering near their cars. No one seemed to be watching him. But he knew better. Someone was. For years, he had worked with Los Pitos, ensuring that their shipments moved smoothly while keeping their rivals, Los Reyes del Sur, at a disadvantage. He had been careful. Meticulous. But now, the other side had noticed. And they weren't sending lawyers with envelopes of cash. They were sending messages carved out of fear. The next night, it was a slashed tire on his truck. The morning after that, a single bullet, left standing upright on his front porch. Ruiz knew what this meant. In the world of the cartel, a warning was the last thing you got before action. But he told himself he could fix it. That if he just played it right, he could make both sides happy. He had spent years walking this tightrope. Why should now be any different? But deep down, he felt it. Something had shifted. The cartel's patience had run out. The walls were closing in. Then came the call. Not from his usual contacts. Not from his cartel handlers. A different voice. Calm. Cold. You let your family see too much. Ruiz's heart pounded. Who is this? He asked. A pause. Then the voice continued, softer this time, almost sympathetic. Tomorrow will be your last sunrise, Sheriff. The line went dead. Ruiz stood frozen, the weight of every mistake pressing down on him. He had spent so many nights pretending the danger was just for him, that his family was untouchable. Now he knew better. That night, he sat at the edge of his bed, listening to his wife's slow, steady breathing. Down the hall, his children slept, unaware of the storm about to break over them. He knew he should run. Get them out. But where? The cartel's reach stretched far beyond Florida. There was no running. No escaping what was coming. The morning of the tragedy began like any other. The Florida sun stretched over the town, casting long golden rays over quiet streets. Sheriff Daniel Ruiz woke before dawn, the weight in his chest heavier than usual. He knew today wasn't normal. He knew something was coming. He just didn't know when. Or how. In the kitchen, Sarah barely looked at him as she moved around, pouring coffee, buttering toast. Anna sat at the table, scrolling through her phone, oblivious to the danger her last post had invited. Their son Danny sat across from her, complaining about an upcoming math test. For a brief moment, Ruiz thought about telling them. About warning them. About packing them up and sending them away. But where? The cartel had already decided his fate. Running wouldn't save them. He stood, kissed Sarah on the forehead. She stiffened. "Be safe today," she murmured. Ruiz gave a small nod, grabbed his keys, and stepped outside. The morning air felt different. Too still. Down the street, a black SUV sat idling. Tinted windows. Engine running, but no movement inside. His pulse quickened. Was this it? Was it starting already? He climbed into his patrol truck and drove toward the sheriff's office. He didn't know that Los Reyes del Sur had been planning this for weeks. That his fate was already sealed. And that by the time the sun set, his family would be gone. The cartel doesn't warn twice. When they decide to take revenge, they erase everything. By the end of the day, the Ruiz family would no longer exist. No mercy. No second chances. Only a brutal message, written in blood. And the sheriff? He wouldn't just lose his family. He would live long enough to feel the pain of it. Long enough to understand that in the cartel's world, there are no betrayals without consequences. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, Florida would be left in shock. The news would break. An entire Lawman's family, executed. And the world would finally know the truth behind his secret business. But by then, it would be too late. They weren't going to send a single assassin. That would be too clean. Too quick. No, they wanted to make an example out of him. They wanted Sheriff Daniel Ruiz to suffer. The operation had been put together by El Zuro himself, meticulously planned, calculated with cold efficiency. 6 men. 4 vehicles. 3 attack locations. The first team was already in position. Ruiz had no idea that his world had already started to collapse. Ruiz pulled into the sheriff's station, coffee still warm in his cup, when the first call came through over the radio. Dispatch, shots fired. Residential neighborhood. Unknown number of assailants. His gut twisted. A moment later, the second call came. We have reports of a break-in. Same area. Multiple armed suspects. Ruiz's blood ran cold. His radio crackled again, this time, the voice was different. Shaken. Hesitant. Sheriff, a pause. It's your house. His hands went numb. His mind emptied. The only thing left was instinct. He slammed the truck into gear, tires screeching against the asphalt as he sped through town, sirens wailing. Heart pounding, but deep down, he already knew. He was too late. It had started just minutes after he left. 2 men, dressed as utility workers, knocked on the Ruiz family's door. Sarah, already suspicious of everything lately, hesitated before opening it. We got a work order for the gas line, one of them said, holding up a clipboard. Sarah frowned. Wrong house. She started to close the door. That's when the first gunshot rang out. Sarah fell backward, hitting the floor, clutching her bleeding shoulder. The 2 men forced their way inside. Anna screamed. Danny ran for the back door. One of the men grabbed Sarah by the hair, dragging her across the floor. Where is your husband? He demanded. Sarah didn't answer. She spat blood at his feet. The second man was already moving toward Anna. Then, another shot. This one from the hallway. Danny. The boy had grabbed his father's spare pistol from the bedroom drawer. He was shaking. His hands unsteady. But he fired again. Missed. The gun clicked empty. The second man turned, aimed, and fired. Danny crumpled against the wall. Anna sobbed. Sarah tried to crawl toward her son. The first man knelt beside her, pressing the barrel of his pistol against her temple. He leaned in, voice low, deliberate. This is what happens, he murmured, when your husband makes bad choices. A final shot echoed through the house. Outside, the black SUV peeled away just as the first neighbors ran toward the sound of gunfire. Ruiz was still 3 minutes away, and he didn't even know that the second attack had already begun. 2 men walked into the sheriff's office. Calm. Casual. Their guns hidden beneath loose jackets. They strolled past the front desk, nodding at the deputy on duty. Then, in one motion, they drew their weapons and opened fire. Bullets tore through the station. Officers scrambled for cover. Papers. Shattered glass. Blood. Officer Jimenez, one of Ruiz's closest deputies, was hit in the first few seconds. He fell forward, clutching his side, gasping for air. The gunmen didn't stop. They moved room by room, searching for one person. The sheriff. But Ruiz wasn't there. One of the gunmen radioed in. "He's not here." A voice responded, calm, unbothered. "Doesn't matter. Finish it." More gunfire. More bodies fell. Then, the 2 men calmly walked out, climbed into a waiting vehicle, and disappeared into the morning traffic. Ruiz's truck skidded to a stop in front of his house. The front door was wide open. He ran inside, heart pounding, already knowing what he would find. Sarah. Danny. Anna. The silence was unbearable. His world had ended in minutes. A scream built in his throat, but nothing came out. His hands trembled. He reached for Sarah, cradled her lifeless body, whispered her name over and over as if it might bring her back. The sirens were distant now. The radios crackled with voices he couldn't hear. The world blurred. Then, movement. Anna. She was barely breathing. Her eyes fluttered open. Ruiz's fingers pressed against her pulse. Faint. Weak. "Hold on, baby. Hold on." He scooped her up, stumbled outside, just as the first police cars arrived. The medics rushed toward him, taking Anna from his arms. Someone was yelling orders. Deputies were securing the scene. Ruiz barely noticed. His mind was stuck on one thing. This wasn't just a hit. It was a message. They didn't just want him dead, they wanted him to live in pain. And as the news spread, as reporters swarmed the town, as the community struggled to comprehend the horror that had unfolded, one thing was clear. The sheriff had made a deal with the devil. And now, the devil had collected. The weight of the massacre sent shockwaves far beyond his town. A sheriff's family slaughtered in their own home. A cartel's warning, written in blood. And Ruiz? He had been spared. Not as a mercy, but as a curse. He was meant to live, long enough to feel the weight of his choices. Long enough to understand the price of betrayal. Long enough to know that in the cartel's world, there is no forgiveness. Only consequences. And once you're in, there's only one way out. Sheriff Daniel Ruiz thought he could beat the system. He thought he could play both sides. He thought he could control the game. But the cartel doesn't play games. And now, as he stood in the wreckage of his life, there was only one truth left. The cartel always wins. If you want more gripping true crime stories, subscribe now. Turn on notifications.